yeas are 201, the nays are 213. The amendment is not agreed to. The House will be in order. Members will please take their seats. Last night, Americans received a jolting reminder that freedom remains under siege by forces around the globe who relish violence over free expression and terror over democracy. Chair would ask all present to rise and observe a moment of silence in honor of Ambassador Stevens and the American personnel killed in Libya. The House will resume voting.
Without objection, 2-minute voting will continue. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 112-660 by the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Holt, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-660, offered by Mr. Holt of New Jersey.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
House Speaker John Boehner leading the House in a moment of silence for the 4 U.S. State Department personnel killed in Benghazi yesterday in Libya, including U.S. Ambassador to Libya Chris Stevens, Foreign Service Information Officer Sean Smith, and 2 others. The White House today ordering that flags should be flown at half-staff around the country through Sunday at sunset. Meanwhile, the Associated Press reports that U.S. embassies in at least 7 countries in the Middle East, Africa, and the Caucasus are warning of possible anti-American protests following the attack on the consulate in Benghazi. The embassies in Armenia, Burundi, Kuwait, Sudan, Tunisia, and Zambia, along with the embassy in Egypt, which was hit by a protest on Tuesday, all issued warnings today advising Americans to be particularly vigilant. That's from the Associated Press. The New York Times is reporting that Obama administration officials suspects that the attack in Libya that killed the American ambassador and the other 3 diplomats may have been planned rather than a spontaneous mob getting out of control. We have a video of these statements earlier today from the President, Secretary of State, and from Mitt Romney as well, and you can find those in our video library at cspan.org. The House back to amendment votes on the bill that would have the Agriculture Department exchange federal lands with the state of Minnesota for about 90,000 acres of state-held lands in the Boundary Waters Canoe area in northern Minnesota. This amendment by Rush Holt of New Jersey would strike the bill's provisions, the waiver provisions, on the National Environmental Policy Act. It's a 2-minute vote. 2 more amendments following this.
Voted. Anyone wish to change vote?
Mr. Clark of Michigan. Mr. Clark of Michigan votes aye. Ms. Bass of California. Ms. Bass of California votes aye. Diaz-Duarte votes no. Jackson Lee, Texas. Jackson Lee, Texas votes aye. Mr. Goldberg. Mr. Goldberg votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 177, the nays are 236. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment 3, printed in Part B of House Report 112-660 by the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-660, offered by Mr. Ellison of Minnesota.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
The Boundary Waters Canoe Area is just over 1 million acres of forests, lakes, and rivers along the Minnesota-Canadian border. The underlying bill would call for the Agriculture Department to exchange federal lands with the state of Minnesota for about 90,000 acres of state-held lands in Boundary Waters. Minnesota Representative Keith Ellison with an amendment which would bar inclusion of the National Forest System lands within the required land exchange, where that inclusion of the land would have a negative impact on private property, property values, and small businesses. One more amendment vote after this, and then the Democratic motion to recommit, and final passage still ahead.
Is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment 4, printed in Part B of House Report 112-660 by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-660, offered by Mr. Grijalva of Arizona.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
Last amendment vote on a bill that would exchange federal land for about 90,000 acres of state-owned land in northern Minnesota in the Boundary Waters area. This is Raul Grijalva's amendment, which would strike the appraisal language in the bill. It's a 2-minute vote. The Democratic motion to recommit, a last chance to change the bill, is next, and then final passage after that. We also expect after that that the House will move to begin debate on extending the electronic surveillance law, FISA, for another 5 years.
Amendment is not adopted. Accordingly, under the rule, the committee now rises.
Mr. Chairman.
The Committee of the Whole House and State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 5544 and pursuant to House Resolution 773. I report the bill as amended by that resolution back to the House.
Go ahead. chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 5544 and pursuant to House Resolution 773 reports the bill as amended by that resolution back to the House. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to authorize and expedite a land exchange involving National Forest System land in the Laurentian District of the Superior National Forest and certain other National Forest System land in the state of Minnesota that has limited recreational and conservation resources on lands owned by the state of Minnesota and trust for the public school system that are largely scattered in checkerboard fashion within the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness and have important recreational, scenic, and conservation resources and for other purposes.
The House will be in order. Members are advised to clear the aisle and remove your conversations from the floor. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
I am opposed.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Ellison of Minnesota moves to recommit the bill H.R. 5544 to the Committee on Natural Resources with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. At the end of Section 2B, page 3, line 20 of the Rules Committee print, insert the following new sentence. The Secretary may not include in the exchange under this section any National Forest System land in the state that, as of the date of the enactment of this Act, is used for hunting, fishing, or motorized recreation, including snowmobiling in season.
Just a minute. Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this final amendment to the bill, which will not kill the bill or send it back to committee, this bill, if adopted, will immediately be voted upon on final passage as amended. Now, Mr. Speaker, this bill that we're arguing about right now, it actually is not necessary. The Minnesota State Legislature has already decided that in one of the most beautiful wildernesses in our country, the Boundary Waters, that there will be about 86,000 acres transferred out of there that are into the Superior National Forest. The land will be moved from this wilderness area into the Superior National Forest, and will be the proceeds of which will be used to benefit Minnesota school children. This bill, what it actually does is it doesn't actually facilitate the transfer. The Minnesota State Legislature has handled that. But what it does is it it allows the circumvention of the regular process so that Minnesotans who are part of the business community, the school community, the local community, who are part of the recreational community, who have a stake in this thing, that they will be cut out of the deal. They won't be able to have the transparency that is necessary. And the land, without a doubt, that will be transferred for the purpose of commercial exploitation, most likely mining. And mining, as you know, may have a commercial importance and a commercial benefit, but it is dirty business, and it does affect the businesses that are around it. This bill is designed to help and will help the mining and the timber industry in northern Minnesota. But as we go about this process, we can at least do what we can to make sure that as the transfer takes place, that the outdoor recreational businesses, which are about $1.6 billion in northeastern Minnesota, do not get sacrificed in the process. The Superior and Chippewa National Forests and the Boundary Waters Canoe area make up Minnesota's premier outdoor recreation area. They're just beautiful, and I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, there's been many a time when I've led young people up to the Boundary Waters so that they can get out of the urban environment into the natural wilderness and experience what I believe is God's country. But as we effect this change and these land swaps are taking place, and there's no real process, we're bypassing it through this bill to have real transparency, the interests of the recreational industry, the people who fish, the people who paddle, the people who hunt, and the businesses that supply them, interests are at stake. My amendment would simply protect the land in these forests currently used for hunting, fishing, snowmobiling, bird watching, and all sorts of other activities, and the commercial interests associated with allowing them to do that. The land that we're talking about has very high recreational value. The Chippewa and Superior National Forests provide habitat for hunting and game like grouse, deer, and waterfowl. They contain some of the nation's best fishing lakes, filled with trout, walleye, bass, and pike, and I encourage all of you to come visit. They attract 250,000 visitors every year, Americans of all kinds, but even international visitors, but mostly Minnesotans right from the area and from the Twin Cities. The fact is, the Superior National Forest is the 8th most visited in the entire National Forest System. And they drive, as I mentioned already, Mr. Speaker, $1.6 billion in tourism and recreation industry in northeastern Minnesota. Thousands of small businesses rely on the National Forest, including everything from resorts to hunting outfitters to local restaurants and shops. And I might add, there are almost no, in fact, I would say there are no restaurants or outfitters who name their business after the sulfide mines. No, they call themselves the Boundary Waters Cafe. They name themselves after the beauty and the natural wonder in the area. This bill puts recreation at risk and the industry that supports it. This bill provides no protection for lands with high recreational value. In fact, it explicitly says that land acquired by the state should be used first for revenue-generating activities such as mining and logging. This is why hunting and angling groups in Minnesota oppose the bill, including Minnesota Conservation Foundation, Minnesota Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Minnesota Division of the Isaac Walton League. And what's more, Mr. Speaker, what's more, the bill does not even identify which lands will be exchanged. We don't even know in this map which private property interests will be affected. If you look at this...
Gentleman's time has expired.
Yeah.
What purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Rise in opposition to the motion to recommit.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, apparently the author of the motion to recommit did not read the underlying bill, because what he seeks to do is to say you can't exchange land that is open to essentially multiple use, recreational activities. Well, in Section 2 on page 5, very specifically in the bill, it says that these activities shall be allowed. So I don't know exactly what point the gentleman is trying to make by offering this motion to recommit, unless it's a political statement of some sort. But even if it's a political statement, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, it falls short in that regard. Why do I say that? Because last spring, specifically on April 17th, we had a bill that this body considered on the floor. It was H.R. 4089, authored by our colleague from Michigan, Mr. Benishek, called the Sportsman's Heritage Act of 2012. The essence of that bill was to allow hunting and recreation on federal lands. And yet the author of the motion to recommit is coming down here saying we should have multiple use on this force, but he voted against the bill, H.R. 4089, this spring. Now, I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, the crocodile tears I hear or see from the other side is overwhelming to me. This motion to recommit ought to be defeated. The land exchange that is offered by our colleague from Minnesota rights a wrong that was wrongly made 34 years ago. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the motion to recommit and yes on passage, and yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. Question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The noes have it. Gentleman from Minnesota.
Request a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage. This is a 15-minute vote.
The bill would exchange federal land in the Boundary Waters Canoe area for about 90,000 acres of state-owned land. Minnesota Representative Democrat Keith Ellison has a motion to recommit, which would add a new provision to the bill prohibiting the Secretary of the Interior from exchanging land in the state that, as of the date of the enactment of the bill, of the act, is used for hunting, fishing, or motorized recreation, including snowmobiling. This is a last chance to change the bill. It is a 15-minute vote, and final passage is next. Well, late yesterday in Benghazi, Libya, 4 State Department officials were killed in a violent act by a mob in Benghazi, including the ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens. President Obama, among the number of officials today, speaking out about the murders this morning at the White House that led to the death of Chris Stevens and 3 others from the State Department. The President spoke to reporters. He's joined by Secretary of State Clinton, who also had her own comments today, and we'll try to show those to you as well during this 15-minute vote.
Good morning. Every day, all across the world, American diplomats and civilians work tirelessly to advance the interests and values of our nation. Often, they are away from their families. Sometimes they brave great danger. Yesterday, 4 of these extraordinary Americans were killed in an attack on our diplomatic post in Benghazi. Among those killed was our ambassador, Chris Stevens, as well as Foreign Service Officer Sean Smith. We are still notifying the families of the others who were killed. And today, the American people stand united in holding the families of the 4 Americans in our thoughts and in our prayers. The United States condemns in the strongest terms this outrageous and shocking attack. We're working with the government of Libya to secure our diplomats. I've also directed my administration to increase our security at diplomatic posts around the world. And make no mistake, we will work with the Libyan government to bring to justice the killers who attacked our people. Since our founding, the United States has been a nation that respects all faiths. We reject all efforts to denigrate the religious beliefs of others. But there is absolutely no justification to this type of senseless violence. None. The world must stand together to unequivocally reject these brutal acts. Already, many Libyans have joined us in doing so, and this attack will not break the bonds between the United States and Libya. Libyan security personnel fought back against the attackers alongside Americans. Libyans helped some of our diplomats find safety, and they carried Ambassador Stevens' body to the hospital, where we tragically learned that he had died. It's especially tragic that Chris Stevens died in Benghazi because it is a city that he helped to save. At the height of the Libyan revolution, Chris led our diplomatic post in Benghazi. With characteristic skill, courage, and resolve, he built partnerships with Libyan revolutionaries and helped them as they planned to build a new Libya. When the Gaddafi regime came to an end,
Chris was there to serve as our ambassador to the new Libya, and he worked tirelessly to support this young democracy, and I think both Secretary Clinton and I relied deeply on his knowledge of the situation on the ground there. He was a role model to all who worked with him and to the young diplomats who aspire to walk in his footsteps. Along with his colleagues, Chris died in a country that is still striving to emerge from the recent experience of war. Today, the loss of these 4 Americans is fresh, but our memories of them linger on. I have no doubt that their legacy will live on through the work that they did far from our shores and in the hearts of those who love them back home. Of course, yesterday was already a painful day for our nation as we marked the solemn memory of the 9/11 attacks. We mourned with the families who were lost on that day. I visited the graves of troops who made the ultimate sacrifice in Iraq and Afghanistan at the hallowed grounds of Arlington Cemetery and had the opportunity to say thank you and visit some of our wounded warriors at Walter Reed. And then last night we learned the news of this attack in Benghazi. As Americans, let us never, ever forget that our freedom is only sustained because there are people who are willing to fight for it, to stand up for it, and in some cases lay down their lives for it. Our country is only as strong as the character of our people and the service of those, both civilian and military, who represent us around the globe. No acts of terror will ever shake the resolve of this great nation, alter that character, or eclipse the light of the values that we stand for. Today we mourn for more Americans who represent the very best of the United States of America. We will not waver in our commitment to see that justice is done for this terrible act, and make no mistake, justice will be done. But we also know that the lives these Americans led stand in stark contrast to those of their attackers. These 4 Americans stood up for freedom and human dignity. They should give every American great pride in the country that they served and the hope that our flag represents to people around the globe who also yearn to live in freedom and with dignity. We grieve with their families, but let us carry on their memory and let us continue their work of seeking a stronger America and a better world for all of our children. Thank you. May God bless the memory of those we lost, and may God bless the United States of America.
Mr. President, was this an act of war?
Relationship with Libya moving forward?
President, from this morning, the House continues with the motion to recommit vote on the Minnesota Boundary Waters bill. Also this morning, Mitt Romney at his campaign headquarters in Florida in Jacksonville condemned the attacks in Libya. He called them outrageous. He also criticized the administration for giving mixed signals in its response. His comments are 10 minutes, and we'll show you what we can as this vote continues.
Good morning. Americans woke up this morning with tragic news and felt heavy hearts as they considered that individuals who have served in our diplomatic corps were brutally murdered across the world. This attack on American individuals and embassies is outrageous. It's disgusting. It breaks the hearts of all of us who think of these people who have served during their lives the cause of freedom and justice and honor. We mourn their loss and join together in prayer that the Spirit of the Almighty might comfort the families of those who have been so brutally slain. 4 diplomats lost their life, including the U.S. Ambassador, J. Christopher Stevens, in the attack on our embassy at Benghazi, Libya. And of course, with these words, I extend my condolences to the grieving loved ones who have left behind as a result of these who have lost their lives in the service of our nation. And I know that the people across America are grateful for their service, and we mourn their sacrifice. America will not tolerate attacks against our citizens and against our embassies. We'll defend also our constitutional rights of speech and assembly and religion. We have confidence in our cause in America. We respect our Constitution. We stand for the principles our Constitution protects. We encourage other nations to understand and respect the principles of our Constitution, because we recognize that these principles are the ultimate source of freedom for individuals around the world. I also believe the administration was wrong to stand by a statement sympathizing with those who had breached our embassy in Egypt, instead of condemning their actions. It's never too early for the United States government to condemn attacks on Americans and to defend our values. The White House distanced itself last night from the statement, saying it wasn't cleared by Washington, and that reflects the mixed signals they're sending to the world. The attacks in Libya and Egypt underscore that the world remains a dangerous place and that American leadership is still sorely needed. In the face of this violence, America cannot shrink from the responsibility to lead. American leadership is necessary to ensure that events in the region don't spin out of control. We cannot hesitate to use our influence in the region to support those who share our values and our interests. Over the last several years, we've stood witness to an Arab Spring that presents an opportunity for a more peaceful and prosperous region, but it also poses the potential for peril if the forces of extremism and violence are allowed to control the course of events. We must strive to ensure that the Arab Spring does not become an Arab winter. With that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Steve?
The statement you referred to was a very toughly worded statement last night. Do you regret the tone at all, given what we know now?
The embassy in Cairo put out a statement after their grounds had been breached. Protesters were inside the grounds. They reiterated that statement after the breach. I think it's a terrible course for America to stand in apology for our values. That instead, when our grounds are being attacked and being breached, that the first response of the United States must be outrage at the breach of the sovereignty of our nation. And apology for America's values is never the right course.
Governor Romney, do you think, though, coming so soon after the events really had unfolded overnight was appropriate to be weighing in on this as this crisis is unfolding in real time?
The White House also issued a statement saying it tried to distance itself from those comments and said they were not reflecting of their views. I had the exact same reaction. These views were inappropriate. They were the wrong course to take. When our embassy has been breached by protesters, the first response should not be to say, yes, we stand by our comments that suggest that there's something wrong with the right of free speech.
What did the White House do wrong then, Governor Romney, if they put out a statement saying they disagreed with it?
Their administration spoke. The President takes responsibility not just for the words that come from his mouth, but also from the words that come from his ambassadors, from his administration, from his embassies, from his State Department. They clearly sent mixed messages to the world, and the statement that came from the administration, and the embassy is the administration. The statement that came from the administration was a statement which is akin to apology, and I think was a severe miscalculation.
Governor, when you talk about mixed signals, the world is watching. Isn't this itself a mixed signal when you criticize the administration at a time that Americans are being killed? Shouldn't politics stop for this?
We have a campaign for presidency of the United States and are speaking about the different courses we would each take with regards to the challenges that the world faces. The President and I, for instance, have differences of opinion with regards to Israel and our policies there, with regards to Iran, with regards to Afghanistan, with regards to Syria. We have many places of distinction and differences. We join together in the condemnation of the attacks on American embassies and the loss of American life, and join in the sympathy for these people. But it's also important for me, just as it was for the White House last night, by the way, to say that the statements were inappropriate and, in my view, a disgraceful statement on the part of our administration to apologize for American values.
Governor, some people have said that you jumped the gun a little in putting that statement out last night and that you should have waited until more details were available. Do you regret having that statement come out so early before we learned about all of the things that were happening?
I don't think we ever hesitate when we see something which is a violation of our principles. We express immediately when we feel that the President and his administration have done something which is inconsistent with the principles of America. Simply put, having an embassy which has been breached and has protesters on its grounds, having violated the sovereignty of the United States, having that embassy reiterate a statement effectively apologizing for the right of free speech is not the right course for an administration.
If you had known last night that the ambassador had died, and obviously I'm gathering you did not know.
Well, that came later.
That's right. If you had known that the ambassador had died, would you
I'm not going to take hypotheticals about what would have been known one and so forth. We responded last night to the events that happened in Egypt.
One of your professed reasons for running is your economic know-how and your private sector experience. But now that foreign policy and the situation in the Middle East has been thrust into the presidential campaign, can you talk about why specifically you think you're better qualified than President Obama to handle these issues?
I think President Obama has demonstrated a lack of clarity as to a foreign policy. My foreign policy has three fundamental branches. First, confidence in our cause. A recognition that the principles America was based upon are not something we shrink from or apologize for, that we stand for those principles. The second is clarity in our purpose, which is that when we have a foreign policy objective, we describe it honestly and clearly to the American people, to Congress, and to the people of the world. And number three is resolve in our might, that in those rare circumstances where we decide it's essential for us to apply military might, that we do so with overwhelming force, that we do so in the clarity of a mission, understanding the nature of the U.S. Interest involved, understanding when the mission would be complete, what will be left when it is, what will be left behind us when that mission has been terminated. These elements, I believe, are essential to our foreign policy, and I haven't seen them from the President. As I've watched over the past 3.5 years, the President has had some successes. He's had some failures. It's a hit-or-miss approach, but it has not been based upon sound foreign policy.
How specifically, Governor Romney, would President Romney have handled this situation differently than President Obama did? You spoke out before midnight when all the facts weren't known. How would you have handled this differently than the President did?
I spoke out when the key fact that I referred to was known, which was that the Embassy of the United States issued what appeared to be an apology for American principles. That was a mistake. And I believe that when a mistake is made of that significance, you speak out.
And so how would you have handled it?
Governor Romney.
On this vote, the yeas are 183, the nays are 233. The motion is not adopted. Question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, on that I request a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
Final passage on H.R. 5544, which would exchange federal lands with the state of Minnesota for about 90,000 acres of state-held lands in the Boundary Waters Canoe area, about 1 million-plus acres along the Minnesota-Canadian border of lakes, rivers, and forests. It's the final vote in this series. We expect the House to move on to begin debate on extending the electronic surveillance law, FISA, for another 5 years. That's ahead in the House.
Mr. Clyburn. Mr. Clyburn votes no. Mr. Crowley. Mr. Crowley votes no.
On this vote, the yeas are 225, the yeas are 189. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For purposes, the gentleman from Texas seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 773, I call up H.R. 5949, the FISA Amendments Act Reauthorization Act of 2012 as amended, and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 463, H.R. 5949, a bill to extend the FISA Amendments Act of 2008 for 5 years.
Pursuant to House Resolution 773, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary printed in the bill is adopted, and the bill as amended is considered read. The bill shall be debatable for 1 hour with 40 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Judiciary, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, each will control 20 minutes. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Rogers, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Rupertsberger, each will control 10 minutes. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 5949 as amended and currently under consideration.
Without objection.
And, Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, America and its allies continue to face national security threats from foreign nations, spies, and terrorist organizations. Our national security agencies must be able to conduct surveillance of foreign terrorists and others so we can stop them before they disable our defenses, carry out a plot against our country, or kill innocent Americans. In 1978, Congress enacted the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act to provide procedures for the domestic collection of foreign intelligence. To protect Americans' civil liberties, FISA created foreign intelligence surveillance courts comprised of sitting federal court judges. If the government needs to collect domestic information for national security purposes, it must first request permission from a FISA judge. This is limited to domestic information. FISA was never intended to apply to the collection of information from non-U.S. persons in foreign countries. But advances in technology over the last 40 years have changed how overseas communications are transmitted. In 2006, then Director of National Intelligence Admiral Mike McConnell stated that the intelligence community was not collecting approximately 2/3 of the foreign intelligence information that it collected prior to legal interpretations that required the government to obtain individualized FISA court orders for overseas surveillance. To solve the problem, in 2008, Congress passed the FISA Amendments Act to reaffirm our long-standing intent that a court order is not required when a non-U.S. person outside the U.S. is targeted. The Act continues the authority to collect intelligence from foreign targets located outside the United States. The FISA Amendments Act both strengthens our national security and expands civil liberties protections for all Americans. The Act requires an individualized court order for the government to target an American anywhere in the world. Under the FISA Amendments Act, the government cannot conduct any surveillance overseas without authorization. The government cannot target individuals unless there is a reasonable belief they are not in the United States, which the government must try to ascertain. The government cannot intentionally acquire communications when the sender and recipient are both in the United States without an individualized court order from a FISA judge. The government cannot reverse target individuals overseas in order to monitor those in the United States. This means that the government cannot target a U.S. person simply by monitoring a non-U.S. person that the U.S. person is talking to. And for the first time in history, the government must obtain an individualized court order from the FISA court to target Americans outside the United States. Foreign surveillance under the FISA Amendments Act is subject to extensive oversight by the administration and Congress. Every 60 days, Justice Department national security officials and the Director of National Intelligence conduct on-site reviews of surveillance conducted pursuant to the FISA Amendments Act. In addition, the Attorney General and the Director of National Intelligence conduct detailed assessments of compliance with court-approved targeting and minimization procedures and provide these assessments to Congress twice a year. The administration also is required to submit to the Judiciary and Intelligence Committees a copy of any FISA court order, opinion, or decision. It must also submit the accompanying pleadings, briefs, and other memoranda of law from national security officials within the intelligence community that relate to a significant construction or interpretation of any provision of FISA. This law will expire at the end of this year unless Congress reauthorizes it. President Obama has identified reauthorization of the FISA Amendments Act as the top legislative priority of the intelligence community and requests Congress to extend the law for 5 years. H.R. 5949 is a bipartisan piece of legislation to do just that, extend the FISA Amendments Act to December 31st, 2017. Foreign terrorists continue to search for new ways to attack America. Foreign nations continue to spy on America, to plot cyber attacks, and attempt to steal sensitive information from our military and private sector industries. They are committed to the destruction of our country, and their methods of communication are constantly evolving. We have a solemn responsibility to ensure that the intelligence community can gather the information it needs to protect our country and protect our citizens. This bipartisan bill ensures that our country will be able to identify and prevent threats to our national security without sacrificing the civil liberties of American citizens. I urge my colleagues to join me in support of this bill, and I'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
On our side, I would begin our discussion